G'day guys, I'm Benji and you are watching Built by Benji. Welcome to part one of a three-part enclosure build of this custom pine enclosure behind me. It is stained with walnuts. The internal measurements of this enclosure are 1200 high by 660 wide by 540 deep. So essentially it is a 2 foot by 2 foot by 4 foot enclosure, vertical enclosure. In this video I will cover what tools I've used and step by step of the build. So please like and subscribe, and let's get into the video. G'day guys, I'm Benji from Built by Ben. This is the first video of an enclosure build. I'll just go through all the tools that we need to use, or that I'm going to be using in this build. And then yeah, we'll get started on it and go from there. It'll take me probably 4 days to get everything glued and assembled to the point where I'm ready for glass and everything to go in. The longest part is waiting for the glue to dry, speaking of wood. So straight up I use the Gorilla wood glue. I find it works pretty good. I've used it on previous builds and it's held up for 10 years, so can't go wrong with that. But first of all, we'll go through some of the tools that all the tools that we'll be using. And then start off with pencil. I got a couple of adjustable squares. Good old Fat Max tape measure. I'll be using a brad nail gun. I'll be using an orbital sander, a router with a 10mm rebate bit. There'll also be just a 6mm plunge cut, a biscuiter for joining all our timbers together, keeping them all straight and strong, a couple of G clamps. I've got more G clamps than that, but two's enough to show you. A couple of long pipe clamps. Run 4 of them, that's just to glue the fronts and backs together. Got my table saw. Underneath all this mess here there's a table saw, and then behind the camera I've got my drop saw. I prefer to use premium pine to build my enclosures over melamine or plywood. I'll put a plywood base in and a ply top in, which just reminds me I forgot to grab ply while I was at Bunnings this morning, so I'm going to have to go back to Bunnings to buy my base and my top. But yeah, so I'll go through step by step. There'll be a lot of time lapse through this video because just for the time consuming parts. So I'll show you what I'm doing with 1 or 2 cuts, and then the rest of it, that section will be time lapsed. And then we'll just tie it all together and it'll look schmick in the end. Alright guys, I just want to go change into some older sort of clothes, so it doesn't matter if I get glue or crap on them. So today the plan is we're going to get the 2 sides cut out and the front and the back cut out. We'll get the biscuiter, we'll cut the biscuit grooves into them so we can glue all those 4 frames up tonight, leave them dry overnight, and then tomorrow we can assemble them all into the unit. Now this time round I'm going to do something a bit different because I use this paneling in my doors and on the back. When I put my piece of timber around the outside or put these into the rebate, you can't really sand right to the edge without wrecking your rebate with the orbital sander. So you'll notice this time when before I put these in, I'm going to give these all the sand with 180 grit first, and then I'll hit them with 240 grit, just so that part, once it's in the rebate, I don't have to worry about sanding it and wrecking my rebates. So yeah, it's just something I thought about. Usually I put it all together and then I sand it, but then you've got where your corner comes to, because you've got a square corner and you're using a round orbital sander, you end up with a half moon, well not a half moon, but the corner of a circle that doesn't get sanded properly. And yeah, I just saw, I was sitting there thinking to myself last night, how can I do things differently? I thought, yeah, right, I'll just run over these boards, smooth them up, get the stickers off them before I assemble it all. And that way, that part's sanded, I don't need to worry about sanding it. I'll have to give it a light sand when I'm staining it and lacquering it, but that's a light sand, it's not a detailed sand. But we'll get started now. We've got this drop saw over here. We'll go through, start cutting everything out, cut everything to size. Then we'll mark it all up, get the biscuiter out, cut our slots in for the biscuiter, and go from there. Even though these are nice premium pieces of timber, I always do a trim cut off the end of it first, just so that everything lines up with my saw when I've cut it. You know, if you can just see the top of the clamp here, I've clamped a piece of timber on my back guide because I don't have a proper guide on it, so I've just made up a backboard, just so when I'm doing all multiple cuts of the same size, I just move my piece of timber along, clamp it off, and that's where my butt stop is for my timbers. Now we've got my sides, my front and backs cut out. Now the way to determine the sides is, side face is 42mm, front face is 64mm. The reason I go like that is because when you meet your corners, it gives you 64mm and 66mm. So 2mm. They're pretty close, so it looks like a nice square piece. Yeah, you can do whatever size timbers you want, they're just what I work with. I'm going to get all those little pieces. I've got my fronts, backs, sides cut out. So these little front and back pieces, your side, we'll call them tops and bottoms. I'll put 3 biscuits in them, and that's for where my base and my top will locate and glue together, and then I'll put a biscuit in each end of these little ones, and top and bottom of your long ones, so when that butt joint goes together, gets glued up, clamped up, that gives you stability in the cut through the face of it, because there's no nails in this part of the cut. For those that don't know what a biscuit is this little bad boy. Just a little thin bit of scrap wood they cut to shape or whatever. And I'll show you how they work when we get to that stage. I'll put you on time lapse now while I go through and mark all these out. Right, I've got all those biscuit points marked out now, and all my bits of timber that I've got to put biscuits in. So, for those that don't know what a biscuit is, it's like an angle grinder. It cuts a little slot in your timber, half the depth of a biscuit. Biscuits are pretty much all like a dowel. So that's your dowel, that's a biscuit. So what the biscuiter does is puts a slot in it, so you glue that in halfway and join the other piece of timber onto it halfway. So what I'll do is I'll go through and do a couple of these now and show you, and then I'll put these onto a time lapse and do the rest of them because there's a fair few of them. All it is, you've got a mark on it there, which is the centre of your biscuiter. So through this slot you just line that mark up with the marks you put on the timber, plunge it in, and then it's done. So I'll go through and do a couple more. So as you can see along the back of my timber, I've got 1, 2, 3. And then in the ends I've got one at each end. Then all your biscuit does is glue into there like so, which then gives you, when you get another marrying piece, I'll show you in a minute, they'll push over the top. I'll just do another one quickly and show you the marrying piece. Now you don't need to do this if you've just got a couple of screws and don't have a biscuit. You can just screw your timber together or nail it together, whichever. But just for an example, so that there will sandwich on top of a piece like that, but now I can't physically move it that way. So I'll go through, I'll do all my timbers like that, get them all biscuited out, ready for the next stage. Well, we've just made up these two jigs. I'll just slot my timber into. Doesn't hold it that way, but it holds it that way, so when I'm putting pressure against it, it doesn't move on me. And then I just lay it flat on the table, clamp it down with my hand, and plunge the ends. Well, I've got all my biscuits cut in. I'm just going to have to press pause for an hour or so. Go for Drive Bunnings to get some more biscuits. I don't have quite enough biscuits to do the job. And get myself a piece of plywood. So once I glue all this up, I can cut the plywood out and get the top and base ready for it. Right, until then, peace out and I'll be back. Alright guys, next part is start gluing up our frames. Make sure you cover the whole outside edge, and then make sure you get glue down inside the slot of the biscuit. When you put your biscuit in, try and get it central, helps it locate a lot easier. And don't forget to put some glue on the outside of the biscuit so it goes into the other biscuit groove. Now remember our pencil lines that we drew before, you want them all facing the same direction so everything lines up nicely when it's all glued together. Also, our 3 slots we've done for the top and bottom to locate into, make sure they're to the outside of the frames. Now at this stage when we're clamping up, don't over tighten the clamps because you've still got to be able to tap it with your mallet to line everything up straight. Once you've got everything lined up straight, then you can tighten your clamps up. Now with a wet rag, clean up any excess glue. Now for this next stage, I get some blue painter's tape. I tape across the top of my glue joints, so when I put my other pieces on top, there's no possibility of them sticking together. Now just repeat all those steps in sequence to put the other panel together, and the same goes for the two side panels. Then once they're all glued together, we will leave them sit overnight to dry and come back to them tomorrow. Now you've got them in the clamp, throw your tape measure over, check to make sure they're square. That way you can make any adjustments while they're still wet. You'll also notice that I'm clamping them in a downward position while they're in the pipe clamps. I just find if you over tighten in the pipe clamps, what will cause them to do is bow up in the joint. So I just clamp them down to keep them all flat and square. Alright, so I've got them all glued and clamped up. I've run the tape measure over them, check they're square. I'll leave them sit there until lunchtime tomorrow, and we'll come back to them parts later. We'll go back in the shed now. I've got the top and bottom. We'll start cutting that out, getting that ready. I went over to Bunnings, got myself a couple pieces of ply. You just want to have a look which is the better looking sides. So I'll put that to the outside just because it's got all the knots in it. This side here's got some putty where they've filled obviously some knot holes in them. I'll use that as my bottom sheet because once the substrate's over that you won't see it. Then I'll use this one here as my top board, my roof piece. Once again, put the knotty side to the outside, put that side to the inside. Even though it's got a fair bit of floor. Tell you what, I'll cut them, I'll give them a sand up and then I'll decide which side's going where. Now because I'm only using 12mm, what I'll do is I'll split this into two pieces. So that way, what I can do is I can double up around the edge of that base and the top. You'll see what I mean when I do it, but it gives me 24mm thickness of glue face. So it helps with my biscuit, it helps with me helps with the biscuit and helps with glue and a bit more structural support. So it's 60mm. So I'll get 28mm. Right, I've cut these little 25mm rips that I run to the long points to suit the outside. I'll run a bead of glue and use these small 14mm brad nails. They're just long enough to go through the timber and pin it down while the glue dries. So now I'm just lining up the edge of the baseboard on the top. I've got glue on there and just nailing it in. Repeat this process around both the top and bottom. Once done, you should be left with a rebate around the top like that. Inside face, outside face. G'day guys, back for the second stage of the build. We got all our frames cut out last night, all made up yesterday. They're all glued together now. So, I guess a quick sand over today before we start putting it all together. Now this is the inside of the enclosure. This side was face down on the pipe clamps. You can see we've got a bit of a mark here, a bit of excess glue. So we'll sand all that off because once it's all together you can't really sand inside properly. So we'll give everything a quick sand over, make it all nice and smooth and flat before we assemble it all. I've got to route the back edge out in this one for the glass and the back of the back piece for the timber boards. I'll throw you on a time lapse while I sit here and I sand everything, and then we'll come back, start the router. Unfortunately with the router you can't hook that up to the dust extraction kit, so that's the messy part of the whole process. You just have to give it a good sweep afterwards, but that's it. So let's get on to the sand. Righty, I have an audio issues again. We're about to start routing out the front and back. I've made a jig up to hold the timber in place, and I'm using a 10mm rebate bit, and I'll do this in 2, maybe 3 passes.